Hello, this is Andy Burkhart with Syngenta Agronomy Research, and today I'll be presenting results from our 2020 Saltro trials. This year we ran both small plot trials and in conjunction with our NK agronomists, several large strip trials to assess Saltro's performance. First, a quick background for those not familiar with soybean sudden death syndrome, or SDS. The pathogen overwinters in crop residue. What's important to note is that while we often don't see above ground symptoms until much later in the season, SDS infection takes place early in the season. There are early season symptoms, such as root rot with a white or blue fungal growth. Early season symptoms can often be mistaken for brown stem rot. However, if you cut a stem open, you can differentiate between the two. Brown stem rot affects only the stem pith, that innermost part of the stem, causing, as the name suggests, a brown rot. SDS affects the cortex, the area surrounding the pith, where you'll see that fungal growth. The foliar symptoms we most often associate with SDS, like leaf mottling and crinkling and premature senescence, don't show until later in the season. Infection is favored by cool, wet soils at planting and is further exacerbated by excessive moisture during the growing season and cooler temperatures at flowering and pod fill. Fields with a history of SDS or soybean cyst nematode are at a higher risk of loss due to SDS. And lastly, we manage SDS through a mix of genetic resistance, delayed planting, waiting for that soil to warm up and dry out, and seed treatments such as Saltro. So as we move on, we have some good images of both the foliar and root symptoms for SDS. So going from left to right, you see the characteristic leaf mottling and leaf crinkling. And then you see sporulation at the stem base, that kind of white fungal growth on that stem base there. And then lastly, premature leaf senescence. So next, I'll give an overview of what we did last year. So as I mentioned, the NK agronomy team and researchers conducted a number of trials across the Corn Belt in 2020. So on the map, all of the kind of blue-green dots represent the on-farm strip trials that our agronomists ran. And then the black dots represent the Agronomy Research small plot trials. So before we jump into the results, it is important to note that we didn't see a lot of SDS pressure in 2020. Conditions last year just weren't conducive for disease to take hold in large areas of the Corn Belt compared to seasons like 2019. So just keep that in mind as we go through today's results. So first, we'll review what we observed in those large on-farm strip trials. So in those trials, we were able to make a number of very key comparisons, most notably comparing Saltro, Alivo, and our base Cruiser Max Vibrance treatment at 86 locations, as well as comparing Saltro and Alivo head-to-head at 141 locations. So as you can see in the top left bar chart, we did observe a trend in yield when comparing the three treatments, with Alivo falling short of both Cruiser Max Vibrance and Cruiser Max Vibrance plus Saltro. So when we further narrowed our focus to just Saltro versus Alivo, we did observe a significant 1.3 bushel advantage to Saltro over Alivo. So out of those head-to-head comparisons, we had a win rate of 73% with Saltro. So in a year where we didn't have a high SDS pressure, why do we see this difference between these two seed treatments? And the answer is phytotoxicity. So what our competitors like to market to us as that halo effect. So that's simply just phytotoxicity early in the season. And that phytotoxicity hinders critical early season root development and hampers stand establishment. So Saltro doesn't have that phytotoxicity issue and is therefore better able to ward off infection without hampering root development. So you can see in this image the difference between plants. So both were planted and sampled at the same time using the recommended rates of both chemistries, with the Saltro treatment being on average a full node ahead of the Alivo treatment. So next we'll review the small plot trial results. So in 2020, we had planned to look at both seed treatment and genetic resistance responses to SDS. However, as I mentioned earlier, we didn't see much in terms of disease this year. So Also, very important to note, and I think this speaks a lot to the strength of our soybean portfolio, we don't really have a soybean variety without at least moderate resistance to SDS. So we're really only comparing a moderately resistant variety to a highly resistant variety. It's not to say that we don't see SDS under the right conditions. It just makes our jobs as researchers a little tougher if the conditions are not there. So given the geography that our team covers, we had two sets of varieties. Our northern set included S27 M8X as the resistant and S25 B6X as our susceptible. Our southern set was S35 K9X as the resistant and S35 2E3S as a susceptible. So our base seed treatment, again, was Cruiser Max Vibrance. And then on top of that, we had either Saltro or Olivo. Also included was a true untreated check, a naked soybean. So where possible, we inoculated the trial with Fusarium virguliforme. The only location not inoculated was our South Dakota site, simply because SDS hasn't been documented in that region yet. So what did we see in the small plot trials? And the answer is, if you look across all trials, not much. All of the treatments did better than the untreated check, which shouldn't be surprising. However, at Cedar Rapids, Iowa, we did see a significant response. So there, Saltro significantly outperformed the untreated check by 6 bushels and on average performed better than the Olivo treatment by almost 4 bushels. While not statistically significant, I would say that's at least economically significant. So next, I'd like to show how Saltro performs under high SDS pressure. So if we have the right conditions for hot SDS infection, how do our seed treatments perform? So this is a study from Crop Protection conducted in collaboration with the University of Minnesota in 2019. So this trial was managed to have high infection rates. It was inoculated at planting. It was sprinkler irrigated to maintain high moisture, conducive for the pathogen to thrive. Each vertical strip you see in this image is a replication within the field. So any plot with a black box around it is our competitor, and the blue-green boxes are Saltro. So you can see the advantage of Saltro in each individual rep. And then across the whole trial, we saw an average advantage of 16.9 bushels over our competitor. So when you compare Saltro and our competitor to the base treatment of Cruiser Max Vibrance, our competitor had a 5.4 bushel advantage compared to Saltro's 22.3 bushel advantage. So when we see high SDS pressure, we also see a significant advantage of including Saltro as part of the seed treatment package. So to sum things up, 2020 wasn't a great year for SDS. Even still, we still saw an advantage of Saltro, particularly in our large strip trials conducted by NK agronomists, with a 1.3 bushel advantage to our competitor on average and a 73% win rate. The picture in this slide is another one from that University of Minnesota study in 2019, showing just how well Saltro performed compared to our competitor. So additionally, our data from 2020 shows that we don't need high SDS pressure to see the advantage of Saltro. So lastly, if you're interested to learn a little more about Saltro, please visit the link below, whysaltro.com. The website includes data from 2020 strip trials that you can explore on your own, including individual location results. If you have any questions about what Saltro can do for your farm, contact your local NKC dealer.